Hello, thank you so much for having us. In 2004, I gave a presentation in Larry Dahl's seminar class, and it was entitled Finding Orientation. It was full of erudite thoughts, abstract images, and long words. Tonight we wanted to dedicate this lecture to Larry, who is a key figure in bringing me here to the University of Texas, was a supportive, impactful professor while I was here. Since graduating, the University of Texas has continued to play an important role in mine and Thoughtbarn's development. When launching our practice, we taught studios here part-time, and most of our employees to this date have been talented University of Texas grads. We've been back to the school several times a year to sit in on crits and attend lectures and symposiums. So it's a real privilege to be at this podium, kicking off this semester's lecture series. We are sharing work that's mostly done in Austin. So we particularly want to thank Igor Siddiqui, sorry about that, Nicole Wiedemann, and the Tau Sigma Delta chapter. We're going to show a range of projects tonight, seemingly diverse in type and scale, but tied together by a set of ongoing investigations around building with economy of means, expanding material expressions and techniques, and making thoughtful connections to identity and social context of a place. We've always been driven by the desire to figure out what we can make ourselves right now with the resources at hand, and that's pretty much how our practice got started. It was not born out of waiting for the first big commission, or getting licensed first, or working for a big name, or saving money to cushion the lean early years. It's been about building at every opportunity, no matter how small, and trusting it will lead somewhere. My first studio at University of Texas was taught by Richard Swallow, who I'm glad to see in the audience tonight. And in Richard Swallow's studio, he gave us a set of Sister Carita's rules. That first rule that we want to acknowledge is number 7. The only rule is work. If you work, it will lead to something. Rule number 10, consider everything as an experiment.
Robbie and I met at the Rural Studio in 2003, where Robbie was building chairs and taking pictures of people sitting in them, and we collaborated on our first project together, a screened porch addition to a mobile home for a lady named Ola Mae Warren. It was built for a budget of $5,000, and the following year it won the Architects Journal Small Project Award in the UK, awkwardly beating out a project by my 60-year-old boss at the time in London, who got second place. Thoughtbarn hadn't received any commissions at that time, but it did have a logo and a brand identity. The name was meant to be a play on the concept of a think tank, but with something of a rural twist.
Right after grad school in 2006 and 2007, I teamed up with a great friend of mine, Jack Sanders, and Leah Davis, who are also University of Texas grads. We applied for a public art project in Austin called the Lance Armstrong Bikeway. We also collaborated together on a project in Arlington, Virginia, entitled CO2 LED. In 2009, along with some other University of Texas grads, Augustina Rodriguez and John Hart Asher, we opened a digital fabrication consultancy called Begg, with the goal of giving ourselves and other designers affordable access to tools which we've been experimenting with at school. Apologies. These early projects laid groundwork for the philosophy that our practice has followed since. There are opportunities all around us to advocate and manifest good design if you're the follower. Resourceful with tools and materials at hand, flexible in how you construct your role in the process, and willing to take risks along the way.
Over the last 6 or 7 years that we've worked full-time together, we've experimented with a range of practice models across a variety of disciplines. We're going to show a series of projects tonight that we've grouped into 5 distinct modes of practice. We're going to share the opportunities and challenges we've encountered in these ways of working, and how each has contributed to us finding our orientation and agency as design professionals. So the first one, how can we use micro budgets to temporarily transform public spaces? This was a series of small projects that were instrumental to the formation of our identity in the first 2 or 3 years that we practiced together. We were doing typical bread and butter projects for a small architecture firm, residential renovations, fit outs for small businesses, but we realized that the field of public art offered rich opportunities for us to synthesize our collective interests in material experimentation, participatory building practices, and civic dialogues around public space and the shaping of cities. These are typically projects which are financed by municipal or non-profit entities. They often have open application processes, and they invite creative practitioners to make interventions that bridge sculpture and placemaking, usually with loose briefs that encourage you to bring your own agenda. In this case, all of these projects had what we term micro budgets of $25,000 or less, reflecting tiny fraction of what cities are investing in development and infrastructure projects, but at the same time reflecting an opportunity to demonstrate the outsized return that a small investment in the arts can have at the scale of the city. In 2012, in the Grand Center District of St. Louis, Missouri, we won a commission to create a temporary public installation on an empty lot along a main thoroughfare. Grand Center is home to one of the highest concentrations of arts buildings in the country. It's got 12,000 theatre seats and 12 museums and galleries within a 4-block radius. But its public spaces are composed of big parking lots and wide car-dominated roads. So our charge was to transform how the public space of Grand Center was experienced and to prototype how it could be more than just a vector for going from A to B and instead function as a venue to bring people together. So in contrast to the straight lines and hard edges of Grand Center's urban form, we used watery metaphors, streams and deltas, pockets and eddies, referencing St. Louis's location at the confluence of the Mississippi and Missouri rivers, to imagine an ephemeral space made from 25,000 feet of macrame cord, which would draw people into it, slow down their journey, encourage encounters with strangers, and perhaps an exchange of smiles. Macrame cord is more typically used for DIY craft scale projects. Some of you might have used it for making lawn chairs or rugs. However, it's available in a wide range of colors. It costs just a few cents a linear foot, and it's also designed for exterior use. So we thought it could be an effective material to stretch a very modest budget. It also requires no technical skills to work with or heavy machinery. It's lightweight, you can cut it with scissors. It lends itself to being assembled by volunteers, which is another of our favorite budget stretching strategies. So we designed a scaffolding framework with top and bottom plywood plates, and the cord was strung between those, making these double wall enclosures that gradiated between 6 different colors. The material palette could be fully recycled and repurposed at the end of the 6-week project. So the installation was built with the help of over 100 volunteers, a local CNC fabricator, an after-school craft program, local architecture and architecture students and artists, and most importantly, middle school kids from the Arts Academy across the road, who helped us cut 2,000 lengths of cord, followed some very intricate instruction diagrams, and helped us weave it into place on site, working down to the last hour with us for the opening at the annual Spring Art Walk in Grand Center. In the 6 weeks it was up, all sorts of interesting things happened. A youth orchestra performed in it weekly to sidewalk audiences. A group of actors transferred their rehearsals of A Midsummer Night's Dream to the site, transforming it into a magical forest. Theatre goers would wander through it before and after shows, and people would bring their picnic lunches to it. We feared for the fragility of the piece. After all, it could be destroyed with a pair of scissors. But when it was disassembled, the sum of the damage was 3 untied strings. We can only speculate why no vandals or spoil sports, but we like to imagine that it supports our thesis that using our public spaces as venues for participation and creativity helps foster a care for the common good. That same year, just a few weeks later in fact, we installed another temporary piece along a canal in Manayunk, Pennsylvania. Similarly, the goal was to use the arts to energize public space along the canal and raise awareness about a planned investment in water quality and recreational upgrades, specifically calling for an interactive piece. We were really drawn to the canal infrastructure, these webs of pipes and wires and railroads, and we wanted to do something that in some way responded to that. So we proposed a 50-foot long, motion-activated water pump that would turn on when pedestrians or cyclists passed it on the boardwalk, literally raising the visibility and audibility of the water, which was basically invisible from Main Street otherwise. Our concept was that it would be reminiscent of the canal infrastructure, but odd and out of place at the same time, a disruption to the everyday perceptions of the canal. To make the piece function as proposed, we hobnobbed together a curious DIY plumbing system, which combined hot tub manifolds, pumps for basement floods, and motion sensors from home security lights with PVC pipe and LED lights. The parts were assembled and tested in our studio in Austin and then shipped to Pennsylvania, where they were installed with the help of a team that included Chris Taylor, a former UT professor, students from the University of Pennsylvania, and also the client's electrician. The restrictions of the boardwalk were such that we couldn't attach with any mechanical fasteners, so the piece had to be entirely clamped into place, and the key tools for installation were a boat and waterproof waders. So one of our takeaways from the project is the willingness of a really broad range of people to invest their time when the project at hand ignites the imagination and has clear community goals. These projects owe much of their success to the generosity of strangers. The project really was a success at first. It drew people to it like flies to a candle. The water running through the tubes was particularly dramatic after dark, and the boardwalk became a kind of spillover gathering space from the bars on Main Street. During the day, it got a range of reactions. Some people passed by it without even noticing. Others wondered aloud if it was a water filtration system. And that was kind of prescient, because after a storm, we got a phone call. By now, we were back in Austin. The runoff sediment from the storm had blocked up the tubes. The sensors weren't working anymore, and the tubes had turned a sludgy green-brown, and no one thought it was quite as beautiful as a few weeks previously. The ironic thing was that it did serve to reinforce the case for addressing water quality issues in the canal. And it's also a rare occasion when our rendering is a really accurate portrayal of what actually materializes. So the remaining two projects in this category of projects are both local in Austin. They're connected to ambitious development projects concerned with important questions about the city's livability, affordable housing, and urban parks. In both cases, public art was conceived as part of the strategy to solicit feedback and build support from the public on these future development strategies in a way that was experiential rather than abstract, a mechanism for people to experience a transformation of the site in a direct way rather than just look at renderings and plans. So Think East is a 24-acre mixed-use development on the east side that focuses on the neighborhood's need for both affordable housing and studio space for artists. The site is a former tank farm for jet fuel storage, which was closed in the 1990s after a major activist effort by the neighborhood. An unusual partner on the development team is Fusebox, which is a local nonprofit who runs a cutting-edge hybrid arts festival in Austin every year. Some of you may have been to their programming. They won a major grant to run a living charrette as part of the planning process. And they created what they called a public living room on the site for 10 days as part of their festival that invited residents and visitors to engage in activities using that festival format rather than the more typical community stakeholder meetings. So Thoughtbarn made the gateway to the festival. It was a structure reminiscent of the former tanks which had been on the site, and it created a simple exhibition framework for displaying this extensive documentation of the neighborhood's activism. Newspaper articles, sign-in sheets from meetings, photos of demonstrations, all of which till then had been stashed in cardboard boxes at Austin's History Center. It was really rewarding to see the neighborhood residents visit the installation, some of who had been part of the activities, but who had never seen all of the documentation collected in one place before. And one of the repeated feedback requests from the Living Charrette was for this installation to be realized in a permanent form at the future development. And finally, many of you might be familiar with Creekshow. 2018 is going to be the 5th year that it's run in Austin, and it showcases a series of temporary installations along Waller Creek over 2 weekends in the fall. It's become a key venue in Austin for demonstrating the talents of local artists, filmmakers, architects, landscape designers. The origins of Creekshow date to 2014, when a group of architects and artists in Austin, including Murray, Burton Baldridge, UT professors Jason Sowell and Hope Hasbrook, Design Workshop, and AIA Chair Ingrid Spencer, were all approached and charged with developing an art-centered strategy to engage the public in Waller Creek's transformation efforts. If you don't already know about it, it's a project that's going to turn the creek into a major new downtown park, and it's an effort that's going to take years, if not decades, to fully realize. So in the words of Melba Watley, the chair of the Waller Creek Conservancy, the great challenge for us is to encourage people to think about Waller Creek as a place to go when there's really nothing for them to visit yet. So as a group, we collectively conceived of Creekshow, a weekend event with a series of light-based installations along a mile of the creek, which would give people a reason to visit and encourage them to walk along it, with the light from the artworks and the density of visitors transforming perceptions of the area as an abandoned and intimidating place. Our particular contribution was High Watermark, a 50-foot-long undulating canopy of electroluminescent wire, marking the level of the 100-year floodplain. It's an invisible line which is soon going to disappear thanks to a huge stormwater bypass tunnel that was really the origins of the whole project. Our intention was to suspend that from the tunnel, but we soon realized that it interfered with the habitat of thousands and thousands of bats. So instead, we made a steel armature that bolted it to the creek walkway instead. And here's a picture of our team putting that into place. So on the opening night, over 1,000 people walked the creek together in freezing temperatures. Many thousands more have since. So if you haven't attended a Creekshow before, make sure to this November, where you can experience Waller Creek as a dynamic public space and look forward with your fellow Austinites to its permanent transformation in the years ahead.
Okay, I'm back up. I've got to follow Lucy. She's really good at this stuff. Okay, do it all. When should you build a project yourself? The public art projects allowed us to participate in projects at a civic level as a young practice. It also allowed us to develop our chops managing construction at a small scale, analyzing budgets, implementing budgets, looking at schedules, managing fabrication, collaborating with subcontractors, and installing it. That influenced the way that we thought about, our first real architectural commission, the first ground-up house, and the first comprehensive commercial project. We had clients with big ideas, strong design values, and they trusted in our abilities. But we also had ambitious responses to their briefs and a desire to try innovative design material strategies on a modest budget. We needed a third partner to build the projects who would share the risk. We asked everyone in town, and all the answers we got were no. So we decided to build this one ourselves. Santa Ana. Santa Ana the brief was a new house on a quarter-acre lot in a working-class neighborhood of East Austin. The clients are landscape architects and environmental engineer, and they already had lived on the property for 5 years in a small cabin on the property. Instead of deciding to move away, when they outgrew their former house, we wanted to build a new house on this property. The existing 2 trees that were on the property were a heritage elm and a heritage pecan tree that were at the front of the property. This drove an L-shaped plan which would have to be placed around the critical root zones of the property. Along with the property setbacks, the site practically dictated the massing. In the back of the site, they had a garden that they developed over the years. We were going to collect all the rainwater from the project and put it in a cistern that would feed their garden. The massing of the project was trying to stay to the 1-story scale of the neighborhood, which at that time was very kind of small, 1-story, modest housing. We used the massing of the project to also create shade for larger windows, and we also explored how we could cram a lot of different things within the gable form itself. With the cedar wooden volume, we pushed that up to allow cross ventilation instead of using kind of skylights. The program of the project was a 3-story, 2-bath house. It had the kitchen and the living space were oriented towards the garden, and it was kind of modest in size. So, right when we began the project, we realized that we had to dig out 3 feet of existing soil because we needed to. It had terrible soils, and we had to refill it. So we self-performed 50% of the work throughout the project, and we kind of exercised this notion of one sub or one contractor or one person to do everything. We used cementatious board on the siding. We also used cypress on the interior kind of gables here. Here's the kind of large porch volume kind of facing that prairie with the 2 dogs. Here's the kind of the interior, which kind of introduces introduces the little peekaboo high window that you can see from the bedroom. Here are the spaces that we kind of crammed in these triangular zones. Here's someone that some of you students might know playing guitar. It's not plugged in. Next to a dog. But you can see this particular client wanted to lay in his bed and look all the way through his house and look at the garden at the end of his property. Our particular client was also from the great state of Mississippi, so he encouraged us. We were able to save a couple of shekels throughout the project by performing a lot of this work, and we really wanted to put that towards a unique element of the house. And that unique element was the stair handrail. And so the stair handrail was milled out of, consequential kind of balustrades that were based off of the Mississippi River. All right, I'll struggle through that one. East 7th Street. At the same time, we were asked, sorry about this. At the same time as the Santa Ana house, we had a design brief from an advertising agency called Gorilla Suit. They had an old pink building on the east side that was covered in really bumpy stucco that had a leaking stairwell and had an amazing interior office where all the ceiling was painted black. They amazingly gave us 8 weeks to do the design and construction for the project. We really thank them for that. I think they also gave us maybe like $10 a square foot to work with, so we also accepted that as well. The approach. Is it frozen? Sorry, technical difficulties. All right. I know. Sorry, it's frozen. Not in a good way.
All right.
Sorry about that, guys. go into how we made this an amazing place. It looked beautiful. We pulled it off. Huh? The laptop.
What happens if you do escape? Is that okay?
Maybe you can just start and get down to there.
Oh, wow. Here we go. Sorry about that, everyone. Whew. Okay. So anyway, back to this. What we really wanted to do with the project, we wanted to use one material to do a lot of things. And we picked birch plywood. We wanted that to clad all the walls. We wanted it to be part of the cabinetry. We wanted it to be part of the desk. We were able to use Connor, our master craftsman, to do all of this work. We salvaged some of the existing parts of the building, which included some of the existing glazing. We did a word play with the entire office, and we reworked the exterior sign into this new sign called Centaur City. We used sawhorses that were really cheap as the basis of desk. And then that also allowed us to go back to kind of this element. When we design, build, we're able to find economies. And so we put some of those economies to kind of special things, and that special thing was this fabricated screen. These clients, they were really excited. They were like, wow, this is great. You guys kind of know what you're doing, I guess. And yeah, everything's going great. So why don't you come back and help us with this, marshmallow building. So in 2016, they invited us back. They were like, hey, this time, let's improve the exterior appearance of the building. Let's get rid of this 1980s Pomo eyesore stuff. Let's take down this rotting stairwell, and let's raise the roof over this balcony so we can actually see the downtown. So we kind of introduced, a new lighter element. We looked at the stair. We looked at the exterior, all of the exterior environments as places that could create places of habitation, kind of places of collaboration in a sense. The stair became this concrete plinth that had many different kind of roles. Had a second level kind of exterior seating place that was very transparent. Since the building had, for all those years, had this transparent kind of marshmallow kind of box outside, we wanted to introduce this cage, more or less, that would eventually grow vines on it. So we designed and built this as well as part of our great teams. We also worked with landscape architect John Hart Asher on improvements over front.
So you've seen a thread through our work, an interest in building systems that are made from off-the-shelf common materials and that embed complexity in the design process, often using digital tools, but rely on low-tech processes of construction to actually build them. So a natural question that emerged from that over the years for us is, can we design systems that can be easily replicated by non-professionals? And there are two projects we've done that have started to get at this question, albeit on different scales, the Playhive and the Ymca Garden. The Playhive is an example of a project that took on a life of its own that we never expected. And it's a good example of why we still always say yes to projects with interesting briefs, no matter how small they are. In this case, we were approached to participate in a fundraiser to design and build a playscape that could be replicated by homeowners in their backyards. We designed what we termed the Playhive, a structure made entirely from 2x4s and 2-inch screws that use differing lengths and a simple template system to construct a beehive-shaped enclosure for kids to climb up and gather inside. At the fundraiser, we received a lot of enthusiastic feedback, so we decided to make a set of instructions that could be downloaded from the web. We teamed up with a popular playground design blog to make it available for a free download and then didn't really think too much of it. In the first day the instructions were available, the administrator of the blog contacted us to let us know they'd been downloaded over 2,000 times. And by the end of that year, just a few months later, the total number was apparently 16,000. We began getting emails and phone calls from all over the country and even the world, with people seeking advice on technical questions, wondering if they could modify it in size or materials, and sharing photos of what they'd built. We were also receiving inquiries, getting commissions ourselves for further versions from institutions. And since then, we've installed one at the Thinkery in Austin, which included a little mini beehive connected with Velcro that kids could build themselves, and also a slightly more sophisticated version with an undulation in it that was installed at a low-income housing project in Dallas that we made with plastic wood and little peekaboo windows. And finally, if you want to experience one yourself, you can see one as part of Fortlandia this fall, where we'll be one of 10 designers installing forts at the Arboretum through next spring. The YMCA garden is one that also ties into a burgeoning interest in outdoor environments that encourage creativity and community building. This time it was in the form of a community garden. So in 2012, we won a commission from Art in Public Places here in Austin to design what they called the first artist-led community garden in the city. The call was atypical in that it didn't specify a recognizable artwork type, like a mural or a sculpture, that was expected of the project. Rather, it simply asked for an artist to integrate their perspective in the design and cultivation of the garden. The project was located at a new YMCA in North Austin, which was being operated as a public-private partnership with the city. And it was actually an institutional experiment on many levels. On the one hand, in defining a garden as public art, but also even in making city-owned land available for community gardening, and in growing food at a recreational facility. So we laid out the 25,000 square foot garden as a radial site plan with a gathering hub at its center under a shady Arizona ash. Each slice of the pie contains a different program: a wheelchair accessible area, raised beds for individual members, teaching and demonstration plots, a composting area, and a future playground. A public spine invites everyone to enjoy the communal areas, while member beds are enclosed by a colorful sculptural fence. A hybrid tool shed and shade structure marks the entry to the garden and acts as a visual beacon from the adjacent parking lot. So during the project, we often found ourselves defending the value of artist involvement. Why call a community garden a work of public art? A lot of people wanted to know. So in response to this question, we developed a series of value propositions to try and articulate how we felt artist partnerships in civic projects like this could bring people together and encourage stewardship. And these are those propositions. So number one, art activates the imagination. So none of the project partners knew how this initiative would unfold. None of them had done anything like it before. But the idea of fusing public art and community gardening together sparked this imaginative space that generated tremendous support from the outset. Art elevates the ordinary. So rather than building a sculpture, we proposed to treat the utilitarian garden infrastructure as the art project instead. How could typically mundane elements of the garden, a fence, garden beds, tool shed, the paths, be delightful and elevate everyday experiences? Artists navigate uncertainty. There were no less than 8 different city departments involved in the approvals of this project. We went through site plan corrections, building permits, multiple design approvals, and then on top of that, what we hadn't totally appreciated was we'd be leading the entire design of the management infrastructure for the garden, which generated this incredibly complex set of bylaws about the partnership between the YMCA, the city, and the community, which definitely took way more hours than the design did. And so what we felt was that any volunteer group who had taken that on would have disbanded at some point during that. But as creative practitioners and with architecture backgrounds, we were able to eventually navigate through that. Art is a communication tool. So to build interest in the garden, we developed illustrated site plans, renderings, flyers, a website, and signage. These visual communications generated rich community feedback and a great deal of buzz before the garden opened. Art changes the conversation. So during the design process, there was a lot of community disagreement about the need for a fence. Some saw it as a necessary security mechanism. Others thought it was a barrier to inclusion and went against the idea of a community garden. Others thought it was a pragmatic regulator of behavior. So we challenged ourselves to address all of these concerns and designed a sculptural armature that would wind through the garden, leaving some areas open for teaching and gathering while enclosing others, specifically the member beds. So once this proposal was put forward, the either-or conversation dissipated and everyone instead became concerned with ensuring that it survived value engineering, which it thankfully did. Art as a barn-raising mechanism. So the fence also became an opportunity for a collective making exercise where hundreds of volunteers wove thousands of feet of coloured wire into the steel framework, a little bit similar to the St. Louis project earlier. These participants included city workers, local apartment residents, seniors, chefs, artists, a Girl Scout group who also made a little free library for the project. Art as an additional funding stream. So typically community gardens are built on tight budgets with funds raised by volunteers. But by classifying this garden as an art project, it was able to tap into the city's public funds and to build structures that went beyond what's possible really with volunteers. And finally, art as a visual attractor. So on the day the registration system opened, all 50 beds were sold out within 4 hours. When we asked new members about their motivations, they all said a version of, "We saw what was going on and we wanted to be a part of it." So we've come to think of this project as a case study with broader relevance in how the placemaking arts and sustainable food advocates can come together to amplify their collective impact in shaping healthy and vibrant neighbourhoods. Imagine if every community garden had an artist in residence and funds from the city to implement projects. So our final deliverable for this project was a report, which was intended to help encourage the replication of this type of work. It advocated on the one hand for the value an artist can bring to projects like this, and it also made some very practical recommendations for making bureaucratic experiments smoother.
Over the past 2 years, we've been simultaneously building 4 house projects that we've come to think of as our own case study program. Most of them we're acting in the normal architecture role, except for the Navasota Street, on which we're also building it as well. Most of them are in Barton Hills neighborhood of Austin. All began as remodels, additions to mid-century modern homes with footprints around 2,500 square feet, all for families who were planning to or had young children, and all had modest budgets in the context of architect-designed homes. By design, they focus on an agenda similar to the case study program: efficient use of space, connection between indoor and outdoor spaces, flexible open floor plans, and the use of off-the-shelf standardized materials. Through this exercise, we've investigated iterations of a design opportunity that we feel is underrepresented in popular discourse about features of a desirable home. Most homes sort of focus on the floor plan layouts and all have about the same ceilings. What we are calling this is the creative section. The creative section, the principles are the following. The creative section creates a variation of ceiling and roof lines to give personality, definition to different areas of the house. The creative section gives different qualities of light through bringing in light at different heights and angles. The creative section offers a sense of spaciousness and generosity while maintaining compact footprints. The creative section allows new adjacencies between standard house programs that introduce unexpected spontaneity in the way the space is used.
So the first project, Navasota, is actually our own house. It was a house that we bought 7 years ago as a 1-bed, 1-bath, 700 square foot cabin on a 2,500 square foot small lot in a very central location near to our studio and downtown and the river. So in 2013, when we were expecting our son, we renovated the kitchen and the bath, and we built in the porch and added a bedroom for him. Then in 2016, expecting our daughter, we faced the typical challenges of a growing family: the desire for more space, bedrooms for the kids, visiting grandparents, more than one bathroom. But we didn't want to move, so we began planning a second story. And we wanted to do something simple, just put a big box on top of the first story with some bedrooms and a bathroom. But we had a unique issue. Due to our small lot, our existing house was actually over the building setbacks on almost every side. You can see that red line represents the legal building footprint. And that would have required us to set the second story walls in from the first story, which was the opposite of what we wanted to do. What we wanted to do was create a big hat over the first floor to simplify the waterproofing and keep the massing as straightforward as possible. So this is what we called an exercise in applying creative sections to code interpretation. We created a double wall enclosure on the east and west walls, where the conditioned wall, which you can see in the section on the left, which is the yellow wall, the conditioned wall was actually, the insulated wall rather, was actually inside the setback as well as the window. However, there was then a 12-inch ventilated cavity which extended over the setback so that the exterior wall was both over the setback and the first floor wall. So Austin's code allows eaves, bay windows, and passive energy conservation features to extend 2 feet over setbacks. We took advantage of each of these, calling our wall different things depending on who we were talking to. Luckily, Austin Energy agreed with our interpretation of our passive energy design feature, which we persuaded them with this diagram that showed cool air going in from below and hot air coming up above. And they wrote us a letter saying that we could proceed. So we were able to build, let me back up a second. This is just a diagram of the window which was at that first wall. We then created these sort of dormer faceted windows that came out to that front facade. We were able to build the big hat that we wanted to and achieve an overhang on all sides, which you can see here. And in that third picture, that black line that you can see in the wood is actually that vent drawing up that cool air. Cool air getting hotter, that's it. So the intention of the second floor, the design intention, was to give ceiling heights and light qualities that counterbalanced the original low 8-foot ceilings of the first floor. So we had vaulted ceilings starting at 8 feet and going up to 16 feet, filling our allowable envelope. And we had a mix of dormer windows, picture windows, and skylights that brought the light in different ways. We also have a 24-foot double-story open stairwell with operable skylights that encourages the breeze through in those times in Texas when you can open the windows, and give a sense of grandeur to the modest house, as well as this engagement with the tree canopy. We also have a really curious detail where our addition that we had built in 2013, and we were still paying off, so we didn't want to tear it down, had a vaulted ceiling which basically interacted with the new addition. So where you can see that curious giant truss, we kept the vaulted ceiling of the addition and just raised the floor and made it into the HVAC closet at that area. So we now have the guest room, we kept the vaulted ceiling intact. It's still a work in progress, as architects' houses always are, but here are some pictures from the stairwell where we used a perforated metal screen to help filter the light even further. Some pictures from the skylights and picture windows and vaulted ceilings on that second story, and that view up into the trees from the stairwell. Cresthaven, in the Barton Hills neighborhood, as Robbie was saying, a mid-century house with good bones and no less than 5 different levels. Real classic example of the mid-century split-level house. So our brief was just to update the kitchens and bathrooms, introduce light where it was lacking, and rethink the floor plan to allow for working from home with young kids. So basically what we did was to open up the kitchen, living and dining area in the center, but use those existing changes in floor level to kind of define the programmatic zones. There was a master bedroom on one side, kids' bedrooms on the other, and then in the basement, which is on the left, we converted a garage to make a flexible family den with a big staircase connecting the two, and then an office, which is at the bottom, accessed from a separate entry. And then we reclad the exterior and tweaked the volumes a bit to bring in light and make this big, you can see the big slice, the sort of one big window moment, and recladding the existing facade. So what we did with this house was actually keep the original roof line of the house, but find different ways that we could bring in light and sort of views across programs as you went through. So this is our favorite section, which is through that big window where you get a desk nook on the second floor that looks through the window to the garden, but then also overlooks the big stair down to the flexible room. Here you can see a skylight bringing light into the bathrooms, a vaulted ceiling over the living, and then a sort of separate ceiling for the entryway, and then big attic over the bedrooms for storage, storage and HVAC equipment, which every family needs. So here are some photos from the completed project. The entry, the living room 6 inches higher, and you can see the kitchen and dining 6 inches higher again. That view from the desk nook on the second level over out the big window to the yard, and then on the right, the stair down to the flex space. Another view of that. The kitchen, a really simple material palette of white with concrete and wood accents, and then some fun splashes of tile. And finally, the exterior reclad with more generous windows and a fresh facelift, but what we like to feel pays homage to the mid-century roots of the original house.
Mountain View Drive. Mountain View Drive was an existing 1970s rambling house on multiple levels that was in poor condition. I think the driveway was actually holding the entire house up, but when we asked the clients what they liked about the property, they said the only thing they liked was the view. So we took down the house and we kept the view. The brief for the project was it needed to accommodate 3 generations of individuals under one roof in the future. It needed a floor plan with minimal level changes as you approached from the driveway. And at the same time, they wanted the house to feel as connected to the green belt as possible on the steeply sloping side. So we used a simple diagram of dividing the living spaces. I didn't mention this, but they're all facing kind of southwest. So the living spaces all kind of supported the view. You have the main kind of living and kitchen space. Then you have the more utilitarian spaces in the back. And as you go up, we're trying to use, again, that volumetric kind of exploration of, the gable spaces and also the dormer spaces. So you have the main bedroom on the second level and then the main bath. Here are some visualizations of the project. Here is the creative section at work, and we call this the scale shift. This project as you can tell from the driveway, it's a really one-story house. It's very non-assuming, but as you walk around to the back, you're kind of, it becomes a larger kind of 3-story volume. So that's that section starts cutting through. It goes through, here it's going through the kitchen. We had an extension of the kitchen to make an exterior dining room on the wraparound porch. It's going into the kind of the 3-story volume here, which connects the lower kind of basement space, which is meant to be left unfinished, to the kind of higher, more private spaces of the two parents, going into the dormer space. And then again, we're getting a kind of a cross ventilation kind of aspect. You have in the main bathroom that the dormer pops up just so you can get enough of a window so you can ventilate the bathroom and have a cross ventilation breeze kind of going through the bedroom. The project is currently under construction. Here's some views kind of as it's coming together. We're incorporating kind of, wraparound porches. It's got what I like to call like the candy bar effect. You have a material on the outside and then you have material in the inside, kind of like Snickers bar. The clients really love high gloss, kind of semi-gloss paint. Here's the stairwell coming together. Here's kind of what you're looking at from all the surrounding, and there's the supported view that we've been kind of celebrating. The next project that we're looking at is located at Ridgeview. This project in particular was an amazing lot with huge live oak trees. It had a mid-century house, mid-century modern house that was on the site, that the clients wanted us to work with the awkward leftover spaces of the floor plan. They wanted us to raise the roof. They wanted to feel more connected to this amazing site. This was what happens in the majority of these projects for us in a sense. We wanted to remodel the house. We wanted to respect the house. We wanted to keep all of the bones of the house, but we couldn't keep the house. So in the end, we had to scrape the entire house. We only realized this after we had applied for the building permit. So what that meant from the city of Austin's perspective was that we could reuse the existing footprint. And not only that, we needed to reuse the existing canopy that was kind of carved out of these heritage trees over the years. So we came back with a proposal, or we implemented this proposal. What the city of Austin allowed us to do was, to use the existing depth of the concrete foundation, and we introduced, this zigzag roof line that creates butterfly roof ceiling in the main space. That divides the living room and the kitchen, and it also introduces clear story kind of glass on the west to introduce all of these amazing trees. So here's the creative section at work again, kind of going through the main living space, the kitchen. There's also this kind of hidden part of the project that we liked a lot, and that was in the main bathroom. The main bathroom was really buried into the middle of the house, and we wanted a creative way to kind of get light into that. So we put a skylight into that space. Here's some finished photos of that. So you can see how the clear story windows are bringing in all the surrounding trees. The baptismal font kind of bathroom, tub and shower enclosure. We also played with, simple materials on this project. We looked at board and batten hardy siding, and then we also played with the idea of, we wanted the house to feel like it was always there. We wanted to camouflage it in a sense. So we played with the spacing of the battens. We played with the color of black, to tie it into the tree trunks. So with that spacing of the battens and the blackness of the trunks, the house kind of feels like it's always there. Okay, so we're going to talk about, there goes the neighborhood. What happens when small practices build big buildings. This is the project that we are going to refer to as the big project. That's how we always talk about it. We're like, hey, we're working on this really big project. So this project is at least 10 times bigger than any other project we've worked on, and after 4 years of work, it's due to be completed by the end of this year. So it's been an amazing kind of steep learning curve for our office. The first thing to kind of say about this is we're also doing this as a joint venture with another architecture firm. That architecture firm is Delineate Studio, who's led by Bart Watley. You know, our team business is called Thoughtbarn Delineate Studio, and this is the largest of a couple of commercial projects that we're working on together that have married kind of our collective skill sets. So we both have practices of about 5 to 8 people, and so this has allowed us to act as a firm of 10 to 12 people at critical times in the project. So, you know, the project origins, it really came to us, you know, TVDS was invited to work on a 5-barrel Quonset hut at 1100 East 5th Street, which is now called the event center called Fair Market. At the time, those same kind of local developers kind of acquired 4 contiguous lots on the corner of Brushy and 6th Street, and they invited us to, you know, come take a look at it. So we, you know, through this project, we've tested out a lot of different scenarios on what could be built on the project, design scenarios. We've gone for variances with the city to get extra height, and it became clear that the programmatic elements of it, we once had a music venue in this, just to state that, but the programmatic elements really came back to this just needed to be for creative office space. You know, what you're seeing in the city right now is a lot of the urban development is kind of pushing east into East Austin because of the downtown kind of rental market. So we had in the beginning, you know, the question that the whole project team was interested in and kind of why they brought us into this. Why would they even bring us into this? You know, we don't even build projects this big. Like, who are these people? There's the majority of people, the questions they would ask. So we, you know, as well as the clients, we were trying to think about how to design a large commercial project for this neighborhood where we kind of live. We live close to this neighborhood and we've been a part of it. So we were asked to come in and think of and be sensitive to the neighborhood. You know, this type of development is very new. A lot of people are not necessarily enthused about kind of how the city is kind of growing, but the city is growing. So, you know, it's going to continue to happen. So we were interested in doing a project that tried to celebrate the heritage of this light industrial site or industrial area. You know, our brief really looked at how can we take inspiration from the industrial, from the utilitarian structures, the warehouses, the raw material pallets, and what if we left all of that exposed? This further led us to the structural system. So one of the conversations that really materialized early on was, how can we build an office building that uses, that's not a concrete frame? How do we build a building that's not steel and pandecking and concrete slab? You know, so we started talking to the clients about the use of cross-laminated timber. Some of you may or may not know, but it's a structural system that's common in Europe, and I think it's growing a lot in the United States. It's being used a lot more than it was when we started this project. So, you know, the clients were interested in this use from a sustainable aspect. They were interested in a potential use for its ease of construction, and they were also interested in this idea of the aesthetics of this place. What if we put down these cross-laminated timber panels and we've got a finished ceiling and it feels like a sauna? Wouldn't that be great? What if we made it all out of wood? Well, we started looking at when you make it all out of wood, and some of you might know, as soon as you start looking at that, you're looking at columns that need to occur about 25 feet, you know, so that really goes against kind of these open floor plan environments. So what we proposed with the clients was, let's use the best of 2 materials. Let's use steel because of its long span characteristics, and then let's use cross-laminated timber so it can be that finished ceiling.
So one of the things that we did that was really key at the time, the 2012 IBC, which was the adopted code in Austin, didn't recognize CLT as a material that you could use. although it is now adopted in the 2015 IBC. So we actually hired a fire consultant engineer from Arup Associates, and we worked with them to develop an alternative means of compliance through the code as a Type 3 building. And this will be, at the time, and I think it still will be, the first building in Austin that uses this system. So after numerous iterations, here's basically where we ended up. It's a 5-story building. It has 4 stories of below-grade parking. There's a more solid mass on the top of 3 stories that sits over a more glazed, open 2-story ground floor and second level. And the idea was to make a commercial building that had a kind of lively facade and breathable in sense, and kind of to go against the idea of the sealed corporate office block. So there are various devices we used for that. You'll see in the rendering in a second that every window system has an operable window in it. There's this second level balcony porch over the street. So the idea is workers can come from there and sort of interact with the street, and you see that activity. And then there's this big double-story lobby entry that has a big bifold door. And the idea of that is that raises up, there's a coffee kiosk in there, and the lobby can really be used as a sidewalk cafe, not just by the tenants, but also by passers-by, local residents, and so on. So you can see the steel and wood structural system that's exposed here. And then on the exterior, it's complemented by the system of raw steel Corten panels that is a tapered panel that gives a kind of depth and a patina to the facade that will change over time. See some diagrams from that there. And then there's an interior material palette. Obviously, we're just doing the lobby and the bathrooms. It's a shell building. But we're working with cement tiles, glazed brick, and plaster and steel panels to also have this palette of materials that follows the kind of raw utilitarian aesthetic that's been set by the structural system. The lobby also has this CLT screen wall. So there was some large CLT panels left over from the installation, and we're using those to create this sort of feature screen in the lobby. And the idea with this is that, as well as being an artistic element, it kind of showcases the CLT and gives users of the building this chance to see that laminated profile, which otherwise is hidden once the building is finished. A couple of other small details. We worked with the estate of Brian Nash Gill, who was an artist in Connecticut, to license 3 of his woodcut prints, which are these beautiful live prints that he makes from slices of tree trunk. And so we licensed those for the elevators, and so each of the 3 elevators will have a different print that's backlit, and hopefully makes for a more pleasant elevator experience than your typical one. And then the other thing we did, and it was partly to do with our public art backgrounds, I think, is that the clients asked us to write an art plan for the building to help them think about how art could be placed in the building and connected to the local art scene. So we identified these various ways in which murals, paintings, and sculpture from local studios could become part of the building. And that's still in process, but one piece that has been executed is the mural at the bottom by Showgoat Mural Works, is now on the facade of the building opposite at the rear. So office workers in the ground floor space who look out at the alley will now be looking at what is it?
It is a skeleton on a jackrabbit with a cat sitting in a sombrero.
Exactly.
It's pretty amazing.
So the project is going for a LEED Gold certification, and some of the additional features that are helping us get to that hopefully are secure bike parking, showers, obviously a very walkable location, electrical vehicle charging in the garage, and an irrigation system that is supplied fully by the AC condensate of the building. The other key component in it is the HVAC system, which uses a VRF technology. And what that is these localized units that rely mostly on refrigerant lines as opposed to ducts. And so it's a very efficient system, but it also had aesthetic benefits that it really minimizes the amount of ductwork in that open space, which is all going to be exposed. So we took on this scope of work, which is pretty atypical for these kind of projects, where we modeled the entire set of refrigerant lines, sprinkler systems, electrical conduits, and did these very precise diagrams that we worked through with the MEP and the subcontractors on site to figure out how to run all this in the cleanest way. You can see it up above. Most of the main utilities wrap very close to that core, and then you can see kind of hugging to the beam, you get these refrigerant lines and conduit kind of coming out along the beams.
These are just some construction photos. This is probably the first project that we worked on that it took an entire year to dig into the ground and to dig out of it. There's 4 stories, kind of below grade parking. There's just some amazing kind of, you know, what people do to build big buildings is amazing. In March, we got our first cross-laminated timber panels showed up. This was the keystone laying of that. You know, in the development and kind of implementation of this system, the entire main structure needs to be implemented kind of on the lower level, and then they need to put in the main structure on the second level. But they have to leave out the intermediate structures so they can lower in all of the cross-laminated timber panels. So you're looking at 8 feet by 40-foot panels kind of coming in over a period of time. It builds itself up. This is our team on the 5th floor, just some photos from it. All of the structural steel detailing is exposed. We're exposing kind of every old school way, like warehouse. Here's how the lobby's coming together. Here's what our team, myself, Andre, Bart, Nick, all of his team, constantly working with, subcontractors on site that are always like, has anyone ever done this? This doesn't make any sense. Why do you want to run it this way? Is what we get all the time. And we're like, run it this way. So we're orchestrating all of this. It's kind of like our little Pompidou Center, it's hugging to kind of the core. It looks so beautiful. And then we painted it all black, and it disappears, and it becomes this kind of enigma, Has it all, the roof drains, which are kind of this orchestrated kind of beauty. Some of the biggest things that you never really think about coordinating, but we've spent so much time on this. Here we are, the blue building that you've probably seen. Like, what is that blue building? Why is it there? But this is kind of take another day. We've got, all the windows are kind of trimmed out in big steel boxes that kind of project. We've got a 3-inch tapered panel that's slowly going on. Thank goodness it started to rain. Hopefully it doesn't rain too much for the whole building's done, but you can kind of see some of the facade coming in. Here's how that it's kind of all coming together.
So we think that this should be the first building completed in Austin to use CLT. It's certainly not going to be the last, and we look forward to being part of the effort to push its potential in this city and beyond. So for those of you who are wondering whether to stay in Austin when you graduate, we found it to be a really wonderful city in which to practice. There are the opportunities, obviously, of a strong economy, but there's also this strong sense of place here, progressive design values. There's a very collaborative architecture and design community, a really talented network of craftsmen and fabricators, and then a really urgent and interesting, lively conversation about the direction of the city, affordability, the arts, environmental goals, open space. And there's a sense that young practitioners can make a real and tangible contribution to that conversation. We just want to conclude by recognizing our wonderful team of collaborators. They, I think, are all here tonight, who've been instrumental to all of these projects.
So, in dedication to Larry, together we are all still finding our orientation, and maybe quite possibly we always will. Thank you.
what I've heard. There are some Texas playboys that are here that would be happy to meet you out front on the West Lawn, directly outside of Goldsmith, and do some voter registration if you're interested. And for those students, you do not have to have a driver's license in Texas. So if you're interested, questions?
You always do. I just can't follow it.
Can you talk a little bit about like your relationship teaming up on a larger project, like how you, just curious how that worked instead of, did you think about just expanding or did,
You know, at the time, we felt it was best to kind of collaborate with someone. I think we were, we collaborate with so many people, and we had a little bit of a working relationship with Bart and his team, and we also felt that he had skill sets that we didn't necessarily have. I mean, I could honestly say it's been a while since I've worked on a very large building,
Right.
so even the kind of processes of kind of going in and doing the administration and stuff like that. So I think in that sense, it was really great to have, a partner that had that reference, and then we really have enjoyed kind of working with him, and his team on the project, and it's been fun. So I think we kind of treat it as like we're a bigger office in a sense, and we try not to kind of, say it's one or the other, but
like I'm curious, how did you divide the workflow?
we just kind of met as partners, and we just said, we've got this much staff, that we have these skill sets. We just said, we've got these people. He had really skilled people, and so we just took it kind of like a larger firm in a sense. We were kind of like a bigger firm has two small studios. Get the two studios to work together, and we kind of looked at the project in that sense.
It helps that our studios are really close to each other. So just that informal getting together is easy. And at the beginning, I think in some ways the hardest part is the bit at the beginning, the kind of schematic design stuff and, getting on the same page there. And, we'd do a lot of working on design separately and coming together and sort of in a charrette style. As the project went into production, that became a lot easier to share the work just because there was so much of it. So we would, at that point it really was straightforward production stuff. You're meeting, talking about what needs to be done, dividing up the tasks. And I think to the question of would it have made more sense just to, take on more people as a practice, partly we actually started working together on the Fair Market project. And so then we grew with the clients. So for this particular project, it wasn't really a question of should we do this ourselves or should we bring on someone else? We were already a team, and the clients knew us as a team. So that was part of it. And then I think it also really was not a project that started and then went through to the finish. It probably stopped and started for about 2 years before it really got into production. So I think that idea of being two small offices, that I think in the height of construction documents, we had 6 or 7 people working full time across the offices. But then when it was on down periods, which was often, you weren't trying to figure out how to keep people busy who had been hired for that project.
I think the software also helps that. You can only imagine 12 people over here hand drafting, and you're like, I hate that, and you're like, man, what? You hate it, But we're constantly collaborating on the software. You've got 3 people in a different building across the city, but they're communicating,
Right.
and that kind of really enables, kind of a new, much like everyone else is doing, but it really enables you to kind of gather big teams, and you don't necessarily have to be in kind of same building, more or less.
Right. Revit Cloud is definitely key to the project. Mm-hmm.
How is the Core 10 steel aging now? Did it look it looked like it was a little bit funky when it first went up. Is it getting more consistent?
I think it's gonna, it was a big conversation, with clients when you're talking about Core 10 and patina, and you're like, do you really wanna do this, you've got to really want to do it. It's gotta be something that you accept, right? So I think we really tried to tell them, unfortunately, we can try to predict as much as we can, but this is a very unpredictable material. We're gonna get rain from different, exposures. You're gonna get the tapering panel is not necessarily gonna let water kind of fall all in concert. So in a sense, I think we're looking at its evolution. We're not really sure what it's gonna quite look like. So, what you're seeing going up now is where you're getting, they're not quite finished with the building, but the window fins are kind of redirecting water and in some instances, and then you're getting kind of straight shots of water. So in a sense, I think it's just going to be this kind of alive facade.
You can hire a fire truck.
We can hire, but we looked at the pre-patina panels. We consulted on that with a lot of the manufacturers, and some of them offered those, but then they started pulling them back, saying they had problems. So, credit to the clients. They've kind of given us and supported the development of the project. So we hope it kind of all comes together. So.
So you guys have done the very full spectrum of the scales of projects. Do you have kind of a favorite, like, sweet spot where you term is most successful?
I think, part of the reason that we do a diversity of work is because we just enjoy that. Like, we enjoy all the project types, and then they also all have their reasons that you get tired of them too. So just doing the diversity it keeps things interesting. But then as we've sort of said yes to diverse projects and taken them on, we've also then become known, I think, for doing diverse projects. And so it's interesting now that we have a sort of reasonable body of work that people can go and look at, that clients come to us because of that. And it's interesting to hear from them, like, reasons. Like, we'll often get people coming to us who are, say, interested in doing houses, even though they know we're not going to be the contractor, but they like the fact that we have been a contractor on house projects, because they have an idea that that'll help with the management and interface of that side of things, which we really think does. Likewise, interestingly, on this big project, one of the clients is a real public art aficionado, and so he has done everything he can to find opportunities and consult with us on the kind of art side of things, even though it's, a big corporate office, speculative office building. So we are finding that the opportunity to sort of knit those skill sets together, as opposed to working on, we're using this skill set here and this skill set here, is really the case. I think definitely the kind of build experience has helped with subcontractors on the site who will rush down after Robbie to get their questions answered.
I think it's kind of, who comes to you as well. I mean, there's so many talented residential architects doing contemporary work here. A lot of them teach here or are professors here. So you've got to position yourself somewhere, right? You can't, they're probably going to call the Alter Studio before they're going to call Thoughtbarn or Murray Leg or Charles or anyone, before they call us about a house. So we've got to also be flexible. We've got to take opportunities, and we've got to, part of the earlier talk was like acting on opportunities. So I think we act on those opportunities. We also like to give great opportunities to our staff. I think everyone kind of gets bored a little bit sometimes about how many times can you really design a bathroom, or certain things like that. So I think it really, when you look at the studios from maybe an academic standpoint, it's like, well, hey, this is kind of a different project. This is something to change the pace. You've been working on this for so long. Well, come work on this kind of smaller project, or kind of work on, a piece of furniture, or, vice versa.
Prototype.
Yeah.
Do you find that there are meaningful differences in the way that you approach a public art project versus an architecture project?
Let's see, that's a good question.
I think so. I mean, I think the public art projects kind of are a marriage of our two research agendas that we kind of had in graduate school in a sense, you know? It was, for me, it was how can you use tools, be it analog or digital, to kind of, you know, create kind of fantastical things, material experiments. But then also how can you introduce different people that might not necessarily build projects into that process to kind of make these things. And I think, you know, Lucy's interest in like participatory design methods and who you include, you know, and so I think it's who you include and how we include them. Those really kind of help us, you know, think about those projects as research, you know. We don't want to say that they're research because we still have to deliver a great project, but it allows us to kind of open up the idea it's a more open-ended brief.
Mm-hmm. I think in some ways the design process looks quite similar though. There's, you know, a brief in the office, everybody's scratching their heads, sort of throwing ideas against the wall, seeing what sticks, sort of something emerges. But I think the difference is in the public art projects we tend to be right away at the beginning sort of playing with materials and figuring out how something at the scale of a detail can become the project, whereas in architecture projects you're spending a lot of time sort of thinking about programming and adjacencies and, you know, these sort of much more planning based relationships. And then I think also in the architecture projects the set of relationships is really quite scripted. You know, who the clients come to us, we're going to organize this, we're going to go back to the clients, we're going to go find the contractor or decide to take it on ourselves, they're going to have subcontractors, you know, there's a set of relationships that's really quite prescribed. And in the public art projects that tends to be a bit more open, and often there's like, we want you to engage the community in some way, but there's nothing really said beyond that. So part of the early conversation is a lot about, well, who is the community and what would it mean for them to be involved, and how do we want to, you know, who's already there that's shown an interest in this project. And so that's a much more sort of active conversation about who this is for at the beginning of the art projects versus the architecture projects where it's often a lot kind of clearer.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.